Oh, okay. I didn't even see that in there. Oh, there you are. I got you. And I just started recording too, so I'll put you down as in, Heather. Thanks.
And
Bye.
she is a POM apparently in her little photo there.
Welcome. Thank you everyone for your time and interest. And first order of business will be to approve the minutes. I have a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed? All right, the minutes have been passed. Thank you. And in accordance with how we have held these meetings, both in person and then virtually, we provide for public comment for a few minutes prior to, at the beginning of the meeting. Is there anyone from the public, not a member of the FAC, that would like to say something to this committee? Okay. All right, hearing none, we'll move on. I wanted to address a couple of things, well, three things. I have 2 months left as chair of FAC, and so I just wanted to say a few things I figured now instead of the actual last meeting. First, hope everyone knows we have an election coming up for a school board seat. Please take the time to learn about the candidates and vote. It's a caucus starting next week with the election, then the final election happening in November. So please get to know the candidates and vote, and encourage your neighbors and friends to vote. It's I know it's an off year for us, but it's an important election, so please do that. Second, we have a proposed joint meeting with the JFAC. Stacy, I think May 19th, correct?
That is the proposed date, yes.
And I think it's from 7 to 9, although I'll forward the specifics.
Yes, it is
around.
from 7
Okay.
to 9.
Thank you, thank you. We did this a couple of years ago, a joint meeting with JFAC, and I personally thought it was very helpful to both groups. And Kathleen and McSweeney, who's chair, and Stacy will have invited us to join. So May 19th, 7 to 9. And I hope we have attendance. I think you'll find it worthwhile and helpful. We will have the county present some of their thoughts. APS will present its views, all on the CIP, and where there will be some discussion. So it'd be good to hear a little bit of where the county's coming from on their priorities and needs. So please do join. If any questions, let me know. I think it will be worthwhile, especially in the kind of current environment we're in with all the uncertainty going forward. And third, I'd like to say personally, it's been a pleasure serving as chair. And I noted something a couple weeks ago that I wanted to bring up. And first, I want to say I'm not directing this towards members of this committee. You all have spent time and energy learning the issues, volunteering for this. So I thank you all for doing that. But as kind of the broader community, I noticed that in some ways, Arlington seems to be following a bit of a national trend at a lot of anger out there, almost that no matter what we do, no matter what staff does, the board does, we as a community, someone's always getting pretty upset and showing frustration. And I've been guilty of that too. There's been a couple of things that I've been frustrated with, and some things I have some questions about tonight as we get into the CIP. And but one thing really woke me up. I was getting my first vaccination at LeBaron. I think it was 3 weeks ago. And I walk in, and it wasn't even the facility that struck me. It's a new facility, as you all know. It's beautiful, but that's not what struck me. What struck me was how well run it was. And all the volunteers, I happen to know probably about half the volunteers there, just from different things, different neighborhoods, different events. And it's just wonderful, and it reminded me of something I've known and spoken about, what a wonderful community we have here in Arlington. In my view, a really unique place. Just a wonderful place. And I hope that despite frustrations and disagreements, we can get beyond some of this. There's going to be constraints. We're not all going to get what we want. And I hope we can continue to work together towards the common good. I've been particularly lucky, my neighborhood, my schools. I know not every school has been as lucky as I am with some of the administrators and teachers we've had. So I hope we can all focus on bettering the community and those that maybe aren't as fortunate. But I tell you, it just struck me how fortunate I am and we are to be here. And I hope we keep that in mind as we move forward. So thank you for listening to that. And I think we can kind of start the meat of the discussion. I'd like to welcome the new Assistant Superintendent for Facilities, Marcus Gregory. I think he's with us, and hopefully give him a few minutes to address the FAC.
Thank you, John. I think those, first of all, I want to say I'm happy to be with the council, with the group, and being able to address the issues that definitely affect the great district that we all serve, and that's the Arlington district. I think, John, you hit on something that really echoed with me. This is my second week on the job. When I first came in, what I found out was, John, we've got some people that care. And hey, that's something that, you know, coming from the Shoreline District in Washington with a crew that was ready to do whatever needed to be done to make the district successful, spending 21 years in Norfolk, Virginia, the same thing. That type of an attitude is contagious. And I just want to say, hey, I've locked in on some things about Arlington with our little bit of time here that echo those same sentiments. Looking forward to be a part of the team and to do whatever is needed from my position to get things done and to be able to reflect that kind of customer service and well-run organization that you experienced just the other day. So good to be a part of the crew, and thanks for making me a part of the team.
Thank you, and welcome, and thanks for joining Arlington. It's a great time to be here.
Thank you.
Are there any liaison updates? Let's see.
I've got one.
All right, Adam, please go ahead, and then we'll go to Cynthia.
Great. Okay. So ACTC met last week, second to last meeting. We usually meet every 2 months, but we're also going to be meeting in June as a final meeting. A few updates. One logistical one. They were having problems with doing the recordings and making them available via like Microsoft Stream, and so now they're using YouTube. So if you go to the ACTC webpage, you can link to and get the recordings from past meetings, including the one that just happened last week. Let's see, we discussed a number of things. One, return to school transportation. So they've increased the bus load from 11 to 21 due to the new regulations. And they've made some changes to routes. And the bus drivers have been really great about adjustments and doing stuff. And this was going to be the final change they were going to make for them based on that. But that seems to be going well there.
Do they have enough drivers? Are they having trouble getting qualified drivers?
I don't remember that being mentioned during the meeting, but I can certainly ask about that.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. And they're making special routes for SOLs for students that have to take SOLs in person, and they're starting to prepare for summer school transportation. They expect to be back to normal as much as that will be normal in the fall. At this point, that's what they're planning around in terms of routes and everything like that. And then speaking of the fall, so the new school at Reed, which the new name Cardinal Elementary, I believe, is the new name for it. And all the changes with Key going to the on-traditional school site and on-traditional school going to McKinley, that they're working through with the leadership of the schools to make sure they're acclimated to the transportation situation, drop off zones, walkers, buses, that kind of thing, each of those schools, as things get ready, as they get ready for the fall. We talked about some infrastructure projects, which I've mentioned before. So Carlin Springs was a big one where they had some construction work and some changes to make the walking to Campbell and Carlin Springs and Kenmore safer. They've installed some temporary traffic modifications, and so they've actually gotten a lot of negative feedback, and especially from Campbell, dealing with some of the turns and people not being aware of all the changes. So they're continuing with the experiment, but they expect there'll be a lot of changes once it's done due to all the negative feedback they've gotten. Let's see. The other intersection, or the other area, was Nellie Custis and Military Road. Right now there's a stop sign for Military Road and Nellie Custis there, and they're looking into, at this point, they're favoring a roundabout setup there, and I think they're going to work on a pilot for doing a roundabout there. Let's see, and then the third place was Walter Reed Complete Streets, which is near the Career Center. Phase 1, I believe, is close to done or done, which is between 50 and South 5th Street. Phase 2 is between South 5th and Columbia Pike, and the big change there is they're going to be building protected bike lanes along that area. And the bike lanes are already there, but they're going to make them protected bike lanes. And I'll put a link in the chat to a map that shows, or a diagram, sorry, a drawing that shows what they're going to be doing in that section. Let's see what else. Safe routes to school. So the budget, the statewide budget for funding for that program has been reduced by 60%, meaning that the available funding is $350K. Which is a really small amount, and we have gotten some of that funding to pay for staff position in regards to that, and so this year we're probably not going to get enough to fund that position, so it has implications for the budget and the need to fund that position, which has been a contingency in past budgets, but this year they're making it known that it's a must have. Let's see. Vision Zero came up. For those of you who don't know Vision Zero, it's a strategy to eliminate all traffic fatalities and serious injuries, and to keep our transportation system safe, healthy, and equitable. The target year for Arlington is 2030, and right now we currently have about 55 severe and 4 fatal crashes per year, and obviously the goal of this program is to get it down to 0 by 2030. They're currently preparing to get adoption for their action plan on May 15th for the board. So if you're going to the board meeting, that's one of the key items there. And what I'll do is I've asked for a link to the presentation that they did, because there's a lot of really interesting and useful information there, and I'll send that around once I get the message for that, or the link to that. let's see. Also, speed cameras. They've applied for a grant to evaluate some speed camera guidelines and to determine where and how to place them to make them equitable. And they're currently involved in doing an inventory of all the speed zones and school zones, speed zones, to help prepare for that if the grant comes through. And then finally, we talked about, each month we talk about an intersection that the APS has made into a expanded walk zone due to the pandemic, and to look at those intersections and ways in which they can be improved to make them better for walk zones. And this past week, we looked at Williamsburg and Glebe, which is near Jamestown Elementary School. And it happens to be that the county, there's a traffic light upgrade they're doing from the string kind to the poles, and they're working on doing a number of improvements to the crossing there. Even though it's technically not part of the upgrade, they're using that as an opportunity to build that in and maximize the plan that they're doing. So, and I don't have a link for that, but if anybody wants more information on that, I can pass along contact information for that. So sorry that was long, but we talked about a lot of stuff. So.
Wow, that was one meeting?
Yeah, that was one meeting.
Thank you. We got to move on, but any questions real quick? It was a lot he shared with us. Thank you, Adam. Cynthia?
Hey, well, I just, John, I want to thank you for your leadership, and thank you for just how welcoming you were for new members who joined the committee, and prompts me to note that May is Employee Appreciation Month at APS, and also want to do a shout out thanks to APS staff that support this committee. I'm giving an update on the Aquatics Committee, and they are concerned and hope for reconsideration of new plans for the Career Center side. I know we're going to talk about that later today, but the revised plans no longer include a placeholder for a pool, and the committee understands that there's no money now, but they believe that, penny wise, pound foolish, not to identify a location for the pool. It may interest members to know that based on APS enrollment data since school year 13-14, when the last of the new pools opened, the average number of students per lane has degraded 36%. And if full-time students are added from our option high schools, that the capacity would be degraded for 40%. And there has been precedent. HB Woodlawn has opted in the past to provide PE swim segment. And if you move forward to school year 22-23, with the opening of the Ed Center, that the capacity would be degraded 45%. So these are just some things to keep in mind and that we should be watching for. And but it underscores the point that student enrollment can't just continue to increase without impacts on fixed educational spaces or instructional spaces, and pools are instructional spaces, which you can't do virtually. So that's the input from that group. Thanks.
Thank you for the update and the kind words. Again, any questions? And then we have Heather raising her hand.
Thank you. Hold on. Thank you, Cynthia. Sorry if this is an uneducated question, but with the Parks and Rec, the new county facility opening up this summer, do school students not have access to that? Is it possible to have that as a space?
That's a very good question, and the short answer to that is there's two things to consider. First of all, there's the busing part. Now, right now, elementary kids are bused to pools. The Longbridge pool is further away from the Career Center side than either Wakefield or W&L, if you're looking at high school kids. And there is so I guess maybe those are two things to think of. So the distance from the Career Center side, it'd be closer to take them to Wakefield or to W&L, and that the busing situation is probably would make that extremely not possible. But thank you for asking.
Thank you. Anyone else? Adam?
Yeah, I have a question about the trade-off. So, I mean, I know we obviously have limited space there, and there's been a big discussion about whether or not it should have all the amenities that every other high school has. But what are the trade-offs? In other words, if we got a pool there, what are we going to lose? Because I can't imagine that we would be able to put the pool in there and keep everything else that's on the list.
I just again, I'm only reporting from the committee. I hope that as the discussion about that site goes forward, I actually have some thoughts that they have on that site, but I was going to save it for the Career Center discussion.
Sure, that's fine.
So if you all will hang on, I'll raise it when we get there. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Rosa asked a slightly different question that, again, we can get to later, the kind of the alternate question of, with the new county center, will that free up availability at the high schools? Because there were county park and rec pool times were taking up high school pool times.
That's also an excellent question, and the short answer to that is you can only do instruction during the school day. And the other part of the short answer is yes, you could kick the county out during midday, but once you've done that, I guess there is no more.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. And I will get into part of that. Will be part of the Career Center discussion, which I hope we have a very full discussion on that. Michael, to discuss basically return to in-person instruction.
Yep. So let me get this cat off my lap. Okay. So this is, everyone probably thinks this is very straightforward and easy to do, but once you start peeling back some of the layers to what we have to deal with following the social distancing guidelines, it becomes a little more complex. And what I did in preparation for this meeting is I sort of put together some of the challenges that we have. But to start off first, let me just make sure that everyone is aware. Let me bring this up into this window. So if you go to the APS website and go to About Us and Departments and scroll down to Maintenance Services, and then you scroll down a little bit more on the side, you'll see Classroom Occupancy based on social distancing. And in here, it sort of gives you the background information as to, how we approach this this next rollout of anticipation of students' full return next year. And that being said, there's some guidelines that we have to adhere to. And the challenging ones are going to be the ones that have to do with music, which is a 6-foot distancing currently right now, and cafeteria space. So we'll put those to the side for a second, and then I'll get into sort of the meat of it all here. And I know everyone wants to talk about the Career Center, so I'll try to be quick. When we went through this, initially what we did is we followed the Department of Health guidelines that say you have to follow 3 foot in the classroom between students. One important thing to keep in mind is that 3 foot between students does not hold true between instructors and students. So it's something that people just don't really think about, but as we all know, we've all had kids in the system, it's impossible to instruct from 6 foot distancing. So my hope is that, you know, these guidelines will be sort of lifted, and the work that we're doing now won't be in vain. We're gathering a ton of data, which is very good, but coming up with all the different occupancies will just sort of be, you know, thrown out the window. And the reason why I want to talk about occupancy versus capacity is because when we approached this, we approached it as occupancy, not capacity. And the difference between the two is that occupancy is the maximum number of inhabitants based on square footage. Capacity is sort of similar to that, but it has to do with the educational specifications and planning factors. For instance, if you're in a kindergarten class, you have a maximum number of students you can have in that kindergarten class, just like you would in 5th grade, maximum number of students. Now, let's say you're in a room, kindergarten, maximum number is 24 for that school, but the room's occupancy could be 28 students. So those are 2 different numbers, and that's something that we wanted to keep in mind. When we put out these occupancy numbers, we were putting out numbers that were on the planning side. In other words, we were trying to put numbers out that could be improved upon. And when we sent these estimates out that are online, we gave these, and administrative staff and principals are going to have to go through each room and do like they did with the 6 foot distancing and give us actuals in the field. So we're giving them sort of a baseline number, and we're hopeful that they will improve on those. So that being said, if we just think about 3 feet and we think about area, that's about 28 square feet for a circle. 3 feet out from my nose and all areas around me, 28 square feet. We use 27. There's all sorts of stuff in rooms throughout our facilities that are completely different. They're not the same. You go to all different facilities, you have tables in some rooms, you have desks in other rooms, you have collaborative spaces in other rooms, you have more than one instructor in some rooms, you have EL teachers, you have gifted teachers, you have reading. I mean, there's all sorts of things that take place. And that's why I said that this is not just a straightforward, this is the calculation, this is what it is. It has to be done on a room by room basis. But some of the challenges that we're facing, well, I'll get to that in a second. The calculations, like I said, were based on 27 square feet per student. Now, in order to really think about what the student space is, we have to go ahead and deduct some other areas from the room. And in doing that, field observations showed us that for pre-K, SPED, kinder, and grade 1, you reduce the room's overall gross square footage by about 30%. Grades 2 through 5 is about 25%, and grades 6 through 12 is 15%. And then you have this area where student instruction, student stations actually take place. Because that other area could be composed of either circulation of the room, components, casework, various types of teaching materials. And the calculation example that I have on here shows you sort of like the total area of a room, which was 821. You take a 25% reduction because it's a grade 4, and that gives you 615 square feet, 27 square feet per student, and you can safely assume 22 would fit in there. But again, like I said, we're being hopeful that more will be able to go in there once the actual administrators, custodial staff, principals go into those rooms and start laying them out. And as for the layout of the room, this is sort of just an example. This one is from Arlington Science Focus. When you start looking at this room, you can see that there's a shaded area within here. That's the calculated area for the total number of student spaces. You still have a teacher desk up here. And you can see 3-foot guidelines that are provided by the state are not necessarily what we have in the classroom. It makes the desks too close to one another. There's no room for circulation. This one, what we did is we just used 3 feet between desks because of the fact that you have to be able to walk through the desk. You have to be able to walk around the desks. Teachers, instructors, they need to move up and down. And we sort of just did this as an example. And this goes to the 27. And that's why we use the 27 square feet, because this is sort of the baseline. From there, we can always, we think, fit more students if needed. So in other words, if this was a grade 4 or 5 at ASF, they could have up to 28 students. Can they fit an additional 5, 6 students in that classroom? It's possible. If they start scrunching all those together a little bit more, they might be able to fit 1, 2, 3, 4 more. You might get up to 26. It's possible. But the thing is, we needed to assure ourselves that we have a minimum and that we could meet some sort of minimum and give the staff at the facilities something to work off of. Now we get into the challenges. And the challenges are Montessori kindergarten is one of them in particular. Because of the fact that we have these social distancing guidelines, safe and healthy sort of environments that we have to provide for students, manipulatives are not shared, learning materials not shared. So each student in kinder in Montessori is given their own space that they have to have, right, in order for them to have their education and instruction. So what they've done there is they set up sort of these student stations, or almost like cubicles that they've created in the rooms to create these zones and keep the children separated. When we start looking at this, we can see, and I might be able to go to one that might be a little easier to see. I can zoom in on this one. You can see that the 3 foot is plenty of space between students here. No problem with that. You have a 3 foot aisle that goes between, but then when we start getting to some of these other areas of circulation, it gets tight. You only have like a foot between the desk and the student station over here, but you do have access between them. And these are the types of challenges that we advise the superintendent on, and saying that when we gave those numbers and we gave the approach of how much more students we can get, we all have to return as a district. We can't just say that everyone's going to return when we have these specialty programs that exist, that the instruction guides how those students are taught. And by saying that we would then convert the learning lesson taking place in this classroom to strictly desks for kindergarten would go against what they teach in Montessori. So that's one of the challenges. The bigger challenge that we have to face is the cafeteria space. And in this instance, we've used sort of the Taylor cafeteria as the example. And I'll go to the zoom in, which is a little easier to see. So they have sort of these foldable tables and benches there, and they fold out to about 14 feet. Each of them are 7 feet. And because of the social distancing guidelines, we have to keep students 6 feet apart. And if we start looking at this, the way that you have to do it is you have to place students so that they're, not less than 6 feet. And that severely restricts the number of students you can get in the cafeteria. In this instance, for Taylor, we're talking 42 students in the cafeteria. And if we go back here, the facility study said that one turnover for lunch period is approximately 269 students. So that's 15% of the capacity of a cafeteria that we can accommodate. Now, there's been discussion on what we can do when the weather is appropriate, have kids eat outside. Potentially we can split classes and have half the kids eat in the room and then the other half go to the cafeteria. But if we're only able to fit 42 students in there at one time, and one grade cohort could be over 100 students, we still run into that crunch of how do we go ahead and accommodate all the students for cafeteria. So that's a lot to digest, I realize that, and we're still working on these illustrations and instructions that we provided. It's an ongoing thing. We still have to go through for tables in classrooms because we don't have desks for every classroom, right? I mean, it's just, we know the limitations of what we have. When it comes to music, we have to think about, well, how are we going to be able to accommodate music that typically has 40 to 50 students in it? And that room might not be able to accommodate 40 to 50 students. At least that's what it looks like now. So there's more to come on this, but I'm hopeful that all these restrictions and all this sort of work that I'm doing will then be lifted. And when we return in the new year, we don't have to be concerned about it. So that's what I have to report.
Thank you. And I really want to move on to the other couple items that are going to take up the bulk of this meeting. But real quickly, does anyone have any follow-up questions right now?
I just have one quick one, I hope. In terms of that last part about having them lifted, is there any time period that you're expecting or any expectation of when decisions like that need to be made by in order for us to adjust?
Yeah, I think, Adam, that would be something that our legislative liaison would be more knowledgeable on. I am not familiar with when the Virginia government releases information regarding that type of decision. So I don't know. I mean, my gut would say that probably in the middle of summer we'll hear something, but who knows? Let's just stay tuned and find out.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'm sorry, can I jump in and ask a question? In your last thing where you brought up music as an example, if you cannot accommodate all kids, do you continue to offer these, or do you just, if you can't do it for all, you can't do it for any? Where are we on that discussion?
That would be something that would have to come from the Department of Teaching and Learning, Cynthia. And that is, I don't overstep into other departments when I just provide information and try to help them work their way through these, issues that we have. I brought up the Montessori thing, which is a educational specification, not necessarily something that is limited by distancing. But with the Montessori program, if children are able to be, if the guidelines are lifted, therefore materials can be shared, right? Manipulatives can be shared, and they don't have to be restricted to those little student stations. When it comes to the decisions that have to be made as to whether or not instruction is altered to address that, I would just say we would have to stay tuned to see what the DT&L has to say, Department of Teaching and Learning.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm thinking staff can do this in the interest of time. To me, the CIP and the Career Center are very much commingled. So anything that staff plan to present at the beginning before discussion, I'm hoping we can do the CIP staff presentation and the Career Center staff presentation combined up front, and then open up the rest of it for discussion, because to me, it all comes together. And I would like to go through the presentation as quickly as possible. I really want to maximize discussion time. I really want to hear from FAC members, their thoughts on CIP and the Career Center. So please, let's try to do that.
I can get started, and maybe I just go through the highlights of the slides. So Michael, if you can go to the next slide. So our agenda includes these three things, and we'll talk through them real quick. Next slide, please. I think you all heard last year, and you can go to the next slide. Last year, we had a very unusual year. We typically do a 10-year CIP. However, because of the pandemic, it was a 1-year CIP. And my new understanding over the last 3 weeks is that what is in the most recent CIP is really what is in your CIP. So even though prior CIPs that included other projects, our 1-year CIP is now really what moves forward. This year, we're doing a short-term CIP. It's sort of supposed to be a gap that fills in until our next 10-year CIP. When we went into this process earlier this spring, we assumed it was going to be 4 to 6 years. The county has now projected revenues for 3 years. And so this is going to be a 3-year CIP. However, as we're looking at needs that go beyond that, I know there's a lot of discussion about how to make this flexible enough so that we have funding that continues beyond the CIP. If you keep going down, I am not going to try and explain one more. I'm not going to try and explain the budget, but what you'll see is this was the school board's direction for the CIP. So last year, we all know that the Career Center came in over budget. Their priorities for this year included finding additional secondary seats as soon as possible, facility improvements for the full-time Career Center students, as well as some of the other projects that should have been in last year's CIP, but were not because of the 1 year. Next slide. So we, in doing this proposal, we have proposed some plans for the Career Center that Jeff will dig into in a little bit. We actually is doing that. They completed the library renovation. The upstairs of the library is now available during the school day for Arlington Tech or for Career Center students. And so no additional improvements will be planned for the Career Center for those full-time students as part of this proposal. And then you can see also, you can dig into the different kitchen upgrades. They've gone through and evaluated each of the schools that needs the kitchens, the vestibules, the HVAC. Next slide. I would encourage anybody who wants to understand this. The school board meeting on Thursday night, Leslie went in detail on this budget chart, and she does this each year. She goes through what the different colors and the bonding capacity, and basically we have included all of those things on that prior slide. What we haven't provided any cost for is the Career Center. And really the approach is right now to, try and do what the school board's direction has for us, to determine how much additional capacity we have for the Career Center. And by the time the school board adopts the CIP, I suspect it will look significantly different as they sort of begin to identify what priorities and the timing that works, given the need for secondary seats is really the top priority. Next slide, please. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, who can walk through the projects.
Sorry about that. I was lost in my computer. Anyway, I'm going to move through this, but essentially a few weeks ago we came up with a thought, or the thought occurred to us. We were looking at, with John, the possibility of relocating Arlington Community High School to do the addition on the Career Center on that direction, rather than trying to build something, then tear something down, then build something, then tear something down on the building. So it was a thought that we had, but while listening to the board and recently seeing a presentation on 300 square feet in Falls Church, the thought was to ask Stantec, would that footprint that they did at Falls Church of 300,000 square feet, remembering that our concept design was about 370. But would a 300,000 square foot footprint fit between the two buildings, keeping both buildings operating? Because one of the most costly items in that concept was the long phased period and working around an occupied building. We all have realized we don't want to work in an occupied building. So it was just a thought or an idea. We put this together. We were thinking that if you did that in the middle, then you could put the field on the north side adjacent to 7th Street, or you could put the field on the south side adjacent to 9th Street, depending which building you wanted to save. And in conversations with the board, with this idea being shared, the thought is that we get a lot more footprint and a lot more maximizing the use of the site should we use a 2-story building versus a 1-story building that has approximately the same footprint. We still probably would be getting rid of the shop areas, et cetera, et cetera. So we looked at that and how would that phase and how would that work? But currently we have about 150 parking spaces in the middle of the site. We would have to relocate those along South Walter Reed, which is identified as the number 2. And keep the building operating. We'd have to move the relocatables, and we probably move them along Highland Street. We also have to verify that we really need all 16, or could we get away with fewer relocatable classrooms as we work through this process. So essentially, the board, excuse me, directed us to proceed to start looking further at this. Next slide, please, Michael. So essentially the direction we are thinking is basically the massing would be in the center of the site. And you can see this is overlaid against the Career Center working groups heights that they were looking at. Don't forget this is an S3A site. The county can allow us, can vary the setback, can vary the height, and can vary the amount of parking that we provide on site. Provided we are doing things like looking at alternative transportation, trying to maximize the use of the site, doing energy efficient construction, etc. But the nice thing with this option is the biggest concern had always been 7th and Highland and trying to keep that as a lower footprint or the buildings to be in a lower scale that would step down to the residential versus 9th Street where we have that large AT&T tower and a parking garage. So essentially this is the concept that we're trying to look at or have just begun to look at. And again, we're being very mindful with regard to the program that goes into the building because the larger it is, the more expensive it is, et cetera, et cetera. So we are reevaluating some of the premises of the ed spec. However, we have about 6 weeks to go through this entire process. So we're utilizing elementary, middle school ed specs that we last had, which is Ham and Reed. And we're also looking at the Career Center ed spec that we had to try to determine a direction as to what the building should actually have in it for the programs that are intended to be in it. So we're working through that. Next slide, please. This list that we actually have three phases. There's actually a 4th phase. The first phase is actually relocating Arlington Community High School, and the first thing we would do would be take down the, as part of phase 1, would be take down the Fenwick building. But in the meantime, while we had that, we'd have temporary parking. We'd have to relocate the Montessori Public School of Arlington's playground to the ball field and make all of that space work. And as I said, the temporary surface lot to replace our existing parking. So essentially, we would be doing construction in the middle of the site. A lot of concern is raised with regard to do we have enough laydown space, et cetera. We'll have as much, if not more, laydown space than we had at the Heights building. A lot of the materials are going to have to be, on-time delivery, that kind of thing. So we will have to work through that and with that as we move through that construction. And as part of this quick study that we're doing, which is essentially like a CIP study that we typically would do, the only difference is we usually have the CIP study finished by the time the superintendent provides his recommended CIP. We actually just started the study work in earnest today with the design consultant. So we have 4 weeks to pull this together. Phase 2, essentially we would be moving the Arlington Career Center programs would move across the lane, so to speak. Montessori Public School would stay where they are. We would not have the ball field, would not be available. We would still be using the temporary lot as we work through that process. But we would begin construction of I'm sorry, that was phase 2. I tripped over myself there. So anyhow, essentially we would be moving everybody around, and then we would be on phase 3 working into our existing career center. Wait, I'm misreading this. It's too small on my screen. Sorry. Anyhow, you guys can all see that. But in phase 3, we would have the new career center in the central location on the site. And in 2021, Montessori would be moved into the career center building, the existing career center building, which would have gone through a 1-year renovation in phase 2. And we would be able to construct phase 3 would be constructing the field along 7th Street. And somewhere in phase 3, we would be also working on an above ground parking structure in 9th and Highland, or in that area, depending how it works for the layout. We would be, as part of the renovation of the Career Center, taking down probably some of the shop buildings or all of the shop buildings, depending on how the layout works. So the study that we're currently working on, the architects are looking at the entire site. They will be looking at a layout for the renovated existing building, as well as the new massing and blocking of the new building based on square footage. We will be looking at the parking. We will be looking at stormwater on site. We will be looking at all of the things that we know we have to look at. And as far as the engagement with the committees, the board will have to make that final decision. But we're looking at this as a continuation with the BLPC, PFRC, not starting over, because we're going to take into account all of the comments that have already been made and work through the process. Essentially, if the board so chooses in this summer CIP, directing us to begin and come up with a new concept design, which would develop the plan to the level that we had the last plan developed to in March of 2020. Next slide, please. Moving into the facility upgrades for kitchens. Essentially, Food Nutrition have identified 8 sites where kitchen renovations are most needed. We got an architect and estimators to put together designs and put pricing together so that we have as realistic of prices as we can for the CIP. And except for the Randolph Elementary School, there's a modest addition required at all the sites, basically under a couple thousand square feet. Basically, the kitchen size that we need is in the range of 2,500 square feet, and that's the direction that we were moving. And the timing of the renovations was established by Food and Nutrition Services staff based on the problem places they're looking at. We are looking at Ashlawn, Barrett, Campbell, Carlin Springs, Drew, Randolph, Arlington, Science Focus, and Swanson. And just so everybody realizes, the issue with this is putting nutritious meals out for the students is critical to their learning. And I think that if anybody is not aware, most of the kitchens that we are working with were essentially created as serving kitchens. They were not full prep kitchens. Now with the new nutritional guidelines and everything that we're working with, there's a lot of fresh fruit, vegetables, and those kinds of things that require a lot more prep area than most of these facilities have. The other thing is serving lines are generally inefficient, and most schools don't necessarily have 2 serving lines or 2 fully functioning serving lines. And for the amount of students, there's about 40% more students in these buildings than there was when the kitchens had a last redo. And also even the simple things like freezer, refrigerator, and food storage. When these kitchens were built, a lot of the food was centrally received at the warehouse. We had refrigeration and freezing. We also had dry goods storage, so only what was needed at the schools was delivered. So that now is not what happens. Food is delivered directly to the schools from the vendors. So we need more storage space for that as well. Next slide, please. The entry vestibules. We have been working on the vestibules of other buildings as we have worked on them, and MCNN has done some entry vestibules, but essentially we're trying to make our buildings more secure. We have a couple of projects that are actually online for us to begin this summer, which will be next summer's projects, more complicated projects where we have to relocate offices and those kinds of things. These 10 locations that we were looking at are more simple studies. They're all around $250,000 based on the estimates that we currently have. But basically it'll be, if anybody's been in the new buildings where you have to basically be allowed into the office, where you have to register, you cannot go directly into the building and down the halls and not be monitored. So that's essentially what we are creating at those spaces. But the conceptual plans that we came up with were reviewed by Safety, Security, and Risk Management. Thank you, Michael. And timing of the renovations is established based on the priority order provided by Safety, Security, and Risk Management staff. And the places we are looking at are Campbell, Hoffman, Boston, Jamestown, Kenmore, Langston, Long Branch, Nottingham, Arlington Science Focus, Swanson, and Tuckahoe. And one of the things that we are looking at as well is if we do a kitchen project in a school, we would also do the vestibule at that building as the priority. If we have a priority kitchen, we will do the vestibule. It's just more cost effective to have one contractor do both projects the same summer at the same time. That's what we're doing with the projects that we're doing this summer at the existing Arlington Traditional School and Key. Next slide, please. Needed facility upgrades on air quality, HVAC improvements. Basically, we've done full evaluations of our systems. We were really looking at 19 facilities for this upgrade, and we actually got all of the costs all the costs based on that study. And the improvements were categorized by increasing of ventilation, basically to renovate the system, to upgrade it to be, the ventilation system would be a current code rather than the code that it was built. All of our systems were up to code when they were built, but the code has changed. The other thing is, with regard to COVID, is increasing filtration, and how can we increase filtration to achieve the MERV 13 filtration. And the thing that we really have learned is the scope to improve the ventilation and filtration varies widely based on the characteristics of the existing systems, and sometimes require a complete system replacement. Next slide, please. What we have come up with as the recommendation as part of the superintendent's CIP was to include a near-term HVAC enhancement projects in the CIP to address the areas targeted interventions to improve the filtration at the facilities. Essentially, we have the certified air cleaning devices are currently providing us filtration and the air changes from that standpoint, equaling the air changes we're filtering. But we are not filtering our larger areas. So what we are recommending is that we get some larger units that are acoustically appropriate. That's what we're exploring to do, that will ventilate or filter the air in the larger spaces with a true HEPA system, essentially maintaining a filtration system in the buildings until we can afford to, or until we can have the funds available to do the renovations of the systems. The reason that we're looking at this is it could be implemented system-wide within a shorter time frame, less than 3 years. And with the funding available that we currently have, we probably could do it at one time. It's going to be more cost-effective than a comprehensive HVAC replacement, and making capital funds available for the other priorities. The other thing is the other concern is we would be replacing some systems that really have not reached their effective life expectancy. So we would be wasting some value that we have in those systems that are already in place. So what we wanted to do is take a measured approach, continue along. Next slide, please. I think that's in here. Right. Well, the ventilation and filtration that we came up with in the studies will be comprehensively addressed at the time of an HVAC system replacement. And that criteria will ensure ventilation is provided to meet the existing building code requirements and achieve a MERV 13 filtration in all of our buildings. And that when that happens, we would be able to pull out the certified air cleaning devices, as well as these new units that we would be placing in the larger spaces to get us the filtration equivalent to MERV 13. And as occurred in the past, the HVAC system replacements will continue to be funded from the major infrastructure projects line item. So essentially, we will set the priority up for the systems that need to be replaced, and we will put them on a, just like we did Randolph and Gunston recently, we will be doing other buildings and systems in the same way, and enhancing that fund a little bit to make sure that we can happen faster. But it was a significant dollar amount, and we, $350 million to do all of that work at one time, and it would not be equitable across the system because we'd have schools waiting for enhancements, whereas we felt that these upgrade devices, these devices would allow everyone to have the equivalent filtration and maintain those filters until we get the systems replaced. Next slide, please. Moving on to the heights. Thank you, Michael. My eyes aren't that good. We are looking at providing accessibility and short-term parking needs. I think one thing we have to make sure to remember is it's not just about parking. This is about pickup and drop off and handicapped accessibility and having the front door to the Shriver program and having the covered walkway from 18th Street. All of those things were priorities as the board looked at this last August. So we looked at option A, which is an underground garage with all of those things within it, and 75 parking spaces and the artificial turf field above. Option C was an underground garage with 24 spaces. Basically, we were building half the garage. And then option D were the options D were options the board came up with as temporary measures should they not be able to fund the project at the time that they decided to move on. There was no parking included with option D1, and option D2 is to provide surface parking for 20 spaces. And just a reminder, the option B was removed by the board at the August 18th session. Next slide, please.
Jeff, what was option B? Can you remind us?
I don't remember. That was a while ago. I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look at the report in August. It's actually, if somebody wants to pop into the documents, you'll be able to find it in there. Staff's recommendation is actually to pursue the option A, and the reasons that we're saying it comprehensively addresses the short-term parking, on-site accessibility, on-site parent pickup and drop-off, covered accessible entrance, and field space needs, as was promised when this project was first envisioned. Also, the design study and the modifications we made to the design came in with a lower estimate than was proposed in the interim superintendent's FY 2021 CIP last year. Option C provides much less value, basically building a lot less, and it's only a slightly lower capital investment, obviously with significant less features and solving the problems. Option D does require substantial capital investment for a temporary solution. We found a way to put on a covered walkway, but we still have the switchback ramp that gets you down to the Shriver entrance. It kind of still feels like a back door, and there are some severe compromises in either the parking or the field issues that need to be resolved. So if it's affordable, we recommend waiting to pursue option A. The other thing is we still have to do all the underground stormwater work that has been put off due to the fire station being there and the construction of Penzance's property with tiebacks that went through where our underground detention tank was supposed to go. So we have to put all of those structures in to get our master certificate of occupancy for the building. So we need to do that work and get the stormwater system completed for the Heights campus. Next slide, please. Oh, you pulled this up. This is actually, okay, this is turf fields.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat. I just want to let everyone know that I found where it was. So I'll
Okay.
share that with the group, Jeff.
Thank you, Michael. I couldn't retain that from a year ago. Okay, 10 months ago. We do have some funding in the CIP with regard to replacement of synthetic fields. In 2023, we're going to redo the Wakefield field, and this is APS's share of that replacement. And in 2024, the Washington and Williamsburg Middle School, which is over $1 million for those two replacements. And in FY 2025, which is an out year of this CIP, Greenbrier Stadium at Yorktown. Just as a reminder, replacement fields cannot be paid for by bonds. They must be paid for with current revenue. And if we do include it in the MCMM budget, then we need to increase the MCMM budget. So we are not taking from other projects that need to be done. So we need to make sure that that's in the funding. And just the reason you can't do it with bonds is the fields don't last long enough. There's a lot of things that we have to buy with current revenue that are not for a life of a bond. So that it wouldn't last the life of the bond, so we can't use the bond funding for it. Next slide, please. And again, we would be looking at the major infrastructure projects, and proposal includes continued annual funding for major infrastructure projects, $7.8 million to $8.6 million per year, and we're also adding escalation to that as we do other things. And these projects must continue to maintain the existing APS facilities and include HVAC, electrical, roofing, and windows to maintain our facilities. I think the next slide is Lisa. Yes.
All right, so I'll quickly go through projections and just remind everybody that, projections this year are different than normal again because of the pandemic. So when you see these slides, which are similar to what we presented in the past, what you'll see is the first 3 years are the projections we prepared based on the 2020 enrollment. And then where that leaves off, we pick up with the 2019 10-year projections as we're doing this. And what we did in the projections is sort of show you two ranges at each level. We show you first 1,800 and 1,300 seats because we don't know how big this building is going to be. So next slide, please. So what we show you first is high school projections, and that's adding 1,300 new seats. So that's sort of the minimum level that we would add at this at the Career Center. Now, I would say in this, there's 950 seats at the Career Center now with the new space above the library, and that's not including the relocatables. This adds about 350 more seats. Right here, we've got numbers of 150 for high school, 200 for middle school. Those things will be decided as we begin to flesh out this proposal. So those are there as a concept. They're not there as a final landing spot. As you look out over this, so the blue bars are enrollment last year and enrollment this year. All of this is September 30. Then we do the update to projections for next year is that dark green bar. And then the light green are the last 2 years of this three-year CIP that show the Ed Center space opening at WNL, coming online with 600 additional seats in 22-23. Actually, I think it's January of 2022. So it really is coming online before that. But, for planning purposes for the fall, they won't be ready in time for the fall. And then in the yellow bars, we pick up the additional, the prior projections. So it only goes out 9 years total. And here we have that 150 high school seats way out in 26, 27, which is where this proposal is starting from. Next slide, please. And as you're looking at these slides too, the blue bar above these are the capacity when we add that. So you can compare enrollment and projections with the capacity at the level at the different school levels. So this actually is the bigger size. So if we build an 1,800 seat high school, more in line with the capacity at the George Mason Meridian building, That adds 850 additional seats. And this is where we really get more opportunities here to address our capacity needs. Adding 300 high school seats here. Next slide. So as we go into this one, really our crunch is coming in middle school. And so part of what, the vision right now for Arlington Career Center that was worked through the prior planning processes really focused on high school. As we took back the needs of the system and had a conversation with our instructional folks, we started to realize that, building 1,800 high school seats doesn't make sense if somehow we don't address middle school. We did talk about, could we repurpose the Ed Center, do some other things? And really, as they started to look instructionally at what made sense, adding middle school to Arlington Tech or to the Arlington Tech program and the Career Center program makes a lot of sense. So here what we do is that 1,300 middle school, 1,300 seat building and 200 of those seats for middle school, which helps. It doesn't get us as close as where we need to be on the middle school capacity needs. And again, in 26, 27. Next slide, please. And then this shows it at 1,800 seats. 1,800 seats, the more seats we can build, better. Going into this, I think any of us who know and live in Arlington and have been here through the facility study, the community facility study, I think we build more and as big as we can based on the money that's available because land is limited and our resources are going to be limited. So this shows again at the 1,800 seat. Next slide, please. So, and this is the first time that we've actually done a CIP with some bits of the IPP taking shape. So as we were looking at this proposal and what it meant for the site, Montessori K-8 is real, or pre-K-8 is really one of those items that has gotten a lot of support. There has been some conversations between the principals at both Arlington Tech and Montessori because Montessori is a PBL, it's problem-based learning. And so there's a real nice sort of alignment between those programs. So there is a really interesting opportunity here. What we've done for elementary is we would assume that whatever we do in the Career Center would at least be the same size. We might consolidate some of those satellite programs. And we might, the middle school might be combined between the two. So there's some places for some flexibility here. However, our need is not for elementary seats. So part of the art here is figuring out how to serve middle school students on this campus and really make sure it fits within those, the programs that are there. Next slide, please. So just some of the points from instructional information on this, how instruction is informing this. Again, the Career Center vision was for high school seats. However, we've gone back and they are going to probably do some work to adjust this as this plan takes forward. And it adds capacity for between 350 to 850 additional students. Now, again, you're going to see some shifts in those as we really begin to dig into defining what those programs are in the spaces that are available. The pre-K-12 IPP, so this aligns with the visioning work that has been completed for Montessori as well. They've been talking a long time about getting that alignment in all of those programs together through middle school because the students, I'm not sure if everybody's aware of it, but typically you have three grade levels of students in one classroom. So right now our 4th and 5th graders should have the 6th graders in there as the top model. So having them in the classroom with the Montessori students really would help the program be more aligned with its fidelity of implementation. I did address virtual learning, and this was actually a conversation that we'd had with John, asking John Giambalvo how this impacted us. I've had some questions from school board members about, does this reduce our need for high school seats? We are going to have a virtual school next year. I think you all have, if you've got children in the school, you have probably gone in to determine which, if you're going to be in person or if you're going to have your students in a virtual setting next year. Long term, we're likely to continue to have some virtual school remaining, especially for students who find it a better fit for their needs. As you may have seen from the superintendent's presentation last week, you know, I think 95% of the kids overall are planning to come back to in-person, but it is working for some kids and it may help. We do think that it could reduce the need for in-person seats, but we don't even want to begin to estimate that for a while until how we see it works under a normal type of school year. Right now, I think we would be looking at too much. The other piece I think that's really interesting that's not that hasn't been shared yet is I know CTE is looking, Career Tech and Adult Ed is looking to see, you know, virtual is not just, you know, I spend my entire day in a virtual school. CTE is looking at how can we make CTE courses and some of those capstone courses at the Career Center more accessible using a virtual component. So maybe they come to the Career Center once a month for those lab days and they participate virtual in classes on those other days. So it could also help students within their school day and reduce sort of the transportation issues of getting back and forth to the Career Center and some of the logistics that keep kids from taking those courses. Next slide, please. I think it's down 2 slides probably. Yeah, if you can go the timeline. So just as an FYI, again, I learned about this probably mid-April, and the following week we shared it with the school board in a Friday letter. I mean, I was really excited because we know we needed to do something. This is the one site where we could probably build quickly or quicker. Every other site would be starting from scratch where there's already a lot of work done here. So we shared it with the school board in a Friday letter on the 23rd, and in getting their feedback, they asked us to hold a session last Wednesday prior to the presentation at the school board meeting for the Career Center Working Group, the BLPC, and the PFRC. So they had a chance, and we had probably about 2 hours with them, and more than an hour and a half of question and answer. You know, how does this work play into the ongoing thinking? And just finally on this schedule here, we have a work session tomorrow night, and every one of those projects that Jeff went into is going to be more of a deep dig and getting into the details. And then on May 25th, that is when we actually met with John Giambalvo and Kathleen McSweeney from JFAC last Friday, all the chairs and co-chairs to sort of plan out that you guys will have your representatives at the table on the 25th. We will also, we've been talking tonight, we should have a budget for the Career Center, an initial budget for that work session. So that will be more of a budget focused session, as well as bringing Bridget Loft in to help share sort of that instructional vision. So I think that's all I need to share.
Thank you. Just adding the joint FAC-JFAC meeting on May 19th, which I mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
So,
I just popped that in the chat for you, Jim.
Yep, thanks for, yeah, that's what made me say that. Thank you. Okay, covered a lot of ground, and now it's open for FAC members. I really look forward to hearing your thoughts on this. I'll just start by saying a couple things, and in accordance with what I said earlier, I'm going to try to be positive and focus on positives. So one thing is, as I've found over the years, this process is very short timeline for major decisions. And you know, one thing I will do when I report to the board in June is I really think we need to change this process somehow so that we give advisory groups, staff, the community a longer time period to look at these things. It's tough to do this in a month and a half. Questions that have hundreds of millions of dollars worth of impact. So I'm hoping we can maybe improve the process. I thank staff for doing what they've done in this short amount of time. One quick question for Jeff. You said something very quickly, and I just wanted some clarity on it. When we talked about HVACs and you talked about speeding it up on the margins a bit. I didn't know what sort of dollar amounts we were talking about. Can you give a little more context of what you meant by that, or what guidance you've gotten on that?
Sure. I mean, we actually had made a pivot towards the end because we were realizing there was no way we could do all of the work that we had listed in a one-year CIP. with the limitations we have and all of the pressures with regard to the Career Center and all the other things that are on the list. I mean, we could have just done HVAC, and the problem is we could have done it for 10 years and still not have provided equity throughout the system. So we came across these other units, and we had been talking about these units, you know, to put them in at this point, but we were not really using those larger spaces, you know, for larger amounts of students. So we were just using the certified air cleaning devices. You know, mostly in the classrooms, and putting multiple units in some of the medium spaces and opening windows where we can and those kinds of things. But we felt that if we provided the filtered air in all of the spaces, we can do that immediately for everybody, all the, you know, throughout the division, which I think was critical. And that's the reason why we pivoted that direction and maintain these systems and keep the systems rolling. And replacing them as they've reached the end of their useful life, rather than earlier, because it's kind of like replacing a roof when you still have 10 years left on it. You know, you kind of are wasting funds. So that's part of our thought process. We want to keep everybody safe, and we think the filtration does that, and that's the reason why we've gone that direction, and we can handle the entire division at one time.
Okay. Thank you. And just another point I'll make, and then I'll open it up, and people already have their hands raised. I'm a little concerned, given the environment we're in and the budget deficits we're looking at, that putting out a project like this risks looking to be a little bit tone deaf. I know we're looking to meet needs, but this is going to be a project of, I think, $200 million. And I'm a little bit worried about the sticker shock that the community may get as all these other things come to bear. I recently heard from some that there may be federal funding available through the Recovery Acts to help with some of our needs. I don't know much about that. I don't know if APS staff has any insight on that. If you do, please let us know. Otherwise, I don't think we can count on that just yet. I just haven't heard much about that. Has APS heard about federal funding being available for HVAC or other projects like that?
I think I can't say what we've heard and what we haven't heard. I know Leslie's got her finger on the pulse of all that funding. I think everybody's been watching for all of those items and issues as things move forward and change and modify and are offered out there.
All right. Well, given that amount of information, I'm willing to assume nothing, because it's unless we hear something more specific, I don't think we can count on that. I'm hoping we do hear something, but for now,
at this point in time, we're only counting on what we know we can count on.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. All right. I want to get started with my colleagues. Let's see. A number of people have hands up. Rose, please start, then Stacy, then Cynthia.
Okay. So, all right. So I have some thoughts, and I'm going to try to go through them as quickly and thoughtfully as possible. I guess my first reaction when I saw the Career Center proposal last Wednesday was that thank goodness we had gone over budget, because I think that the solution that they're proposing of demolishing Arlington Community High School to allow for the building of a new building from scratch provides a significantly better use of that overall site than the previous design, which I liked, of trying to put new construction over top of and around an existing building that, you know, was is difficult to work with. You know, it wasn't necessarily the best building in the first place. So, and then all of the additional constraints and problems that those things caused within the design, you know, of the garage, of where to put a garage, of the field, where can you fit a field, all of those things. So I guess my big question is, I was only involved with the BLPC thing last year. and only on this committee for, I don't know, 2 years, whatever. But I don't understand how we got to that process last year where the committee, the BLPC folks were told, you can't get rid of the high school and you have to fit all of these things and you got to make it work, when in the first design charrette meeting that we all broke out into groups, that was consistently a, wow, can we please get rid of this high school? Because if we could get rid of the Arlington Community High School, we could get everything to fit. We could get a lot more space. We could maximize this use. Anyways, so saying that, that's kind of where I'm going with this. The next thing I wanted to just read is the APS strategic plan, does list specific core values, and within those core values, stewardship is kind of our facilities group, is the core value that affects us, in my opinion. So it says we have to manage our resources to honor the community's investment in our schools. That's assumedly taxpayer dollars. Create safe, healthy, and environmentally sustainable learning environments. Support, so we're managing our resources to support civic and community engagement. I'm not completely sure what that means. And then manage our resources to serve current and future generations. These core values that are part of the strategic plan, as any strategic plan, should be measurable. And I don't see how we are measuring at any point in what we're doing whether or not we're meeting those core values or those goals. How are we setting our priorities? As Lisa said, the county is landlocked. That means that every addition and every new building has to be the best use, the highest and best use of the site. And if we're not doing that, then we're not meeting those goals. And again, going back to the Career Center, I feel like the previous rendition was not the highest and best use of that site. And I think we're getting closer to that with this newer version. So I guess my question is, are there some guiding principles that basically set and can help determine whether or not we're meeting those goals and heading towards a highest and best use of our land, because it is so limited. And to me, flexibility is one of those. Obviously equity, there's a bunch of other things, but value, cost, the number of seats, there's a whole list you could come up with as to how to measure whether or not our current infrastructure, our current buildings are meeting that goal, and or our new construction. And I just feel like if that kind of process had taken place 2 years ago, 3 years ago, or whenever the Career Center was being looked at initially, then I feel like the demolition of Arlington Community High School would have been thought about well before this year. And then I guess using those same kind of, if there was some sort of guiding principles to be able to measure, then, we could look at the things that Jeff just mentioned, the kitchen renovations, security upgrades, mechanical upgrades, and determine, okay, exactly which of these are going to improve, equity, or, or however, I don't know. But like, if you have to pick between 2 schools to do this year, which one are you picking, and how are you choosing that? Which one gets the priority? And I don't see that there's something measurable about that. Now, Jeff did mention that within the mechanical upgrades that, obviously they have the engineers looking at things. And I think that is measurable because you got airflow and you got, the MERV 13 filters and whatnot. But I don't understand how within the framework of what we as a county are deciding to spend money on, how we know it's the right thing. And I think that's all. Okay.
Thank you. Stacy?
I'm going to let Cynthia go first because her hand was up first. Okay.
Thank you, Stacy. So I don't know if it'd be helpful to go back to that slide where you have, I'm sorry, this is about the Career Center. the slide where you have the like 1, 2, 3, 4, you're showing the, is that, thank you, that one. Okay, so just wondering whether or not there was consideration, or could there be consideration to reorienting. Oh, first of all, I just want to say, I want to agree with Rosa, which probably it was a good idea, or it turns out to be a benefit that it was too costly, and we're relooking, because so many benefits that you could build from scratch and not build with, you know, students tripping over things. But if the building, the new building, the number 3, could be reoriented so it's running along South Walter Reed Drive, therefore you don't have to, you know, remove the relocatables that you need. You still have the parking lot. You don't have to build the temporary thing. But if you could mass things on a horizontal instead of the vertical that you have here. You recall at the meeting where you were briefing the BLPC, PFRC, that someone asked about, was there still going to be a 3rd story on the Career Center site? And if there was going to be a 3rd story, again, I'm going to Lisa. Lisa, I just loved your statement about, you know, we do have little land, and what we have, we should, you know, build to the max. But some of you who are involved in the PFRC, BLPC know that there was a, many wanted a, you know, I can't remember how many stories of this building, but many stories of this building. Anyway, so you orient it horizontally. You put on a 3rd floor, the option for a 3rd floor, which could bridge over to this new school. And, you know, can that fit in that space? And then obviously the playing field would have to be swung around as well once you get the building built. And then someone had asked, I think it was Rosa, somebody had asked about, so it wasn't Rosa, but anyway, what would you give up to have a pool? Whether or not in the kind of the L between the new school, and if there's a bridge or not, you know, you might be able to, you know, put a pool there. Now, I don't know, because I don't have my yardstick out, but did anyone give some consideration to that? Because frankly, you know, putting the mass over there on Walter Reed and building it towards 9th Street, you know, going up, I don't know, 5 stories or something. And in the interim, you've preserved your asphalt parking place. You don't have to move your relocatables. I'll shut up. I think you guys get the idea.
Yeah, I just want to, excuse me, add, this is not a design for Arlington's school. This is the footprint for what was built in Falls Church. It had 300,000 square feet, and that's what the footprint was. That's between part of its 4-story, part of its 5-story. Would that be the configuration? I doubt it. It's just literally putting another building on our site, just to say, can we fit 300,000 square feet there? So that's not a design. That's what's being worked on right now. So I don't know where it's going to actually end up. But I do think, depending on how the field is oriented, there is the possibility that we could actually put an addition. Again, we're talking about the steward of the land. We could put a 2-story addition or 3-story along Walter Reed, and then stepping down to 2 stories at 7th for future growth, if that's something that makes sense. Could that be a pool? Possibly. Could it be something else? Possibly. We still have the opportunity with this option of, if we decided, you know, somewhere down the road, or those in the know at that point in time decided that they wanted to go to the 5 to 6 story wing that goes down towards 9th Street, they could take down the existing Career Center building and do that. I think that's all in the realm of possibilities. The key is that we want to be able to build the new building while keeping those other programs in place and not disrupting the building. One of the things, if we would decide that we wanted to build on the roof, we would not do that until after the Career Center moved out. So that may be a possibility, but again, we're trying to not have a 6-year phased construction project process. We're trying to do it in 2. Because
And
that's
Jeff,
$6.
yeah, I think that is just absolutely wonderful, that idea, and would just ask your very smart people to consider reorienting it, because I think you would also save money by not doing the gravel parking lot and that. So thanks.
John?
Yep.
Hey, I just want to sort of go back to Rosa's question about, like, I mean, maybe everyone just doesn't know this, but I was part of the BLPC, but only setting it up, and then it was turned over to DNC. Prior to that, we did have the Career Center Working Group. And as part of the charge for the Career Center Working Group, which I can bring up now, it states in there, and for reasons why the group didn't, identify that as being something to be removed, it does state in there retention of all existing APS programs through at least 2022, and specifically calls out the ACHS. So I don't know, to answer Rosa's question, why that wasn't something that was ever sort of established way back in the beginning. However, it was something that was mentioned. And it was something that the group was aware of before the BLPC, which I know that sort of they worked off of some of the results of the Career Center Working Group. And, why that wasn't revisited, I don't know. But it wasn't something that was sort of kept off the table, or wasn't something that was sort of, not discussed prior. But just so a little bit of background history. That's all.
Thank you. That's good to know and helpful. Thank you. Stacy?
Okay, I'm gonna lower my hand. Thank you, Jeff and Michael, for those clarifications. I think it's really helpful to look at that slide, understanding that it is, just showing that this is a building that will fit here. This is not where we're planning on putting that building, or that's where it's decided. I think that's really helpful. And I think that would be maybe helpful to communicate that on the slide. So when the public sees it, they don't see that that's, where the building is going to go, or, I just as a communications piece, I think that would be helpful to have that, very clear. Thinking big picture about this CIP, I agree with John that I'm a little concerned about that this is just a 3-year CIP, and for me, I think it's really important to take a macro view of all of our needs, and sort of understand what our limitations are in terms of budget. And it's really hard for me to sort of feel comfortable investing in this project, even though I think it's a great idea. I think building a standalone building makes a lot of sense. I think building doing it as a dual middle school and high school seat is a really great idea also. I was concerned about middle school seats, and I'm glad that they are being addressed through this project as well. And I think an option 6 through 12 program, we know that it works in Arlington. We know there's a lot of demand for it through HB. So I think that's a really great idea. I just, when we're looking at just 3 years of known financial information, I think we have to build in a lot and so many unknowns about, where our projections are going to go, and what that budget outlook is going to look like after 3 years. Will we actually have the bonding capacity to complete this project? Are we considering the cost within that project of also relocating Arlington Community High? We're saying we're tearing down that building, but we have no idea where they're going to go. No idea how much it's going to cost to rebuild that, to rebuild those seats. So I think it's very important that, as, just that we manage community expectations from the start, sort of build in the idea that we're going to have to be flexible based on what the, what the funding outlook looks like in the coming years, and also maybe changing seat needs. I also think this creates a real incentive to find replacement seats for Arlington Community High School seat. Maybe really thinking outside of the box. Can we do it in, can they be in the Crystal City area? Can we build them cheap? How it's really important that we build them efficiently, but it's also really and cost effectively, but it's also really important that we build them that Arlington Community High is moved to a place that makes sense for them. We don't want to move them, to Madison Center, far north of Arlington. Like that doesn't make, there's, somewhere where there's a lot of transportation. For me, the Crystal City area makes a lot of sense because there's, new internship possibilities. There's lots of restaurants. I think we could possibly get, there's so much construction going on there right now. There's a possibility, if there's a possibility of seats in that area, I think APS should jump on them. I know there's a lot of other hands raised, so I'm going to just leave my comments there. There's a lot packed in, but I do think, on top of the other needs that we have, like the parking in the field at the Heights, the security vestibules and the HVAC systems, are we going, the big question is, are we going to be able to afford all of this and meet the needs of the county? So big questions.
Thank you. Adam and then Chip.
Sorry,
Adam,
I had a little trouble getting off of mute there. My question is about the field. So what is the timing on when the current ball field will be taken out of commission? And what is the timeline for design of the new field planning?
I think the slide where we had the phasing shows when the field will be taken out. It'll be taken out with the first step.
Right. But what is the timing on that?
Play area. And then the new field would be available at the end of phase 3.
No, yeah, I realize that. But what in terms of calendar, what are we talking about in terms of?
Well, in round numbers, we're looking at 2 years to build the Career Center, 1 year for the renovation of the existing Career Center, and then somewhere following the relocation of Montessori Public School, that would be demolished. So you're probably looking at 3 years minimum.
Okay, and for the current ball field, that would be taken out?
Well, I don't. Again, we haven't designed anything yet, so I can't say specifically. I mean, it doesn't have much of a right field as it exists, and maybe it could remain, and the play structures stretched along left field. I don't know. We have to look at that. We don't have it designed. Again, we're about 2.5 weeks into this.
Right. Okay. And then in terms of when the design for the new field and green area, when do you expect that to get into motion?
Well, we're going to be looking at it as an idea with an estimate for the school board by the 24th of June. If they decide to proceed with this project, they may give direction just to move into a concept, or maybe a concept and schematic till the next CIP. But I'm guessing that everything could be finalized or revisited at next summer's CIP with regard to that. But as far as getting everything in line and the process and the design and all of that, that's going to take at least a year anyway.
Okay, thank
But
you.
you'll start seeing the work of it. I mean, we'll be starting to, if they decide to proceed with it, the first thing we would probably do is go to a concept design like we had in March of 2020 to that level of design, and then we would be moving on to the next step.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chip, and then Steve.
Great, thanks, John. So I don't want to reiterate some of the comments that have already been made, but I agree with, first and foremost, John's comment about the process. I think it's broken, frankly, for it to result in this without us really sitting down and talking through it. I personally, I sat in on the meeting last week about the Career Center to the BLPC, because I was also a member of the BLPC. And one of the things that I thought was supposed to be looked at was options, other options in terms of, citing programs at high schools, what could be done, say, at other schools. Again, I think there's probably more opportunity at a place like HB to simply just add seats in the classrooms there. Knowing the size of the rooms at HB compared to, say, the size of the rooms at a Wakefield High School or a TJ Middle School, I mean, 650 square feet versus 800 to 1,000 square feet classrooms. Certainly, you could add more bodies and kids to that to kind of start to address enrollment issues, right? Those numbers that Lisa showed earlier. So I don't think really any or much discussion, and again, unless someone can provide some specifics, was done to look at those alternatives. I think Stacy just mentioned Crystal City, right? We've got a complete move now from being in the office to being remote, right? Who knows what's going to happen with space in Crystal City kind of moving forward. Those are my issues. And then again, even what Rosa said about, well, what's the plan strategically here? How is this the best use of that site, particularly to co-locate now, 3 levels of option schools instead of just one, which was originally the high schools that was talked about. And so I just feel like this process is kind of the tail wagging the dog as opposed to the opposite. I think, when you build shiny new objects in an area, everyone's going to want to be a part of that object. And I just feel that particularly for South Arlington, I think some of these decisions that have been made have truly not been in the best interest of students. I mean, we've got such a focus now. It seems like just a hyper focus on option schools first, frankly. And you can look at it from how the dollars are spent. And folks may want to disagree with that. That's perfectly fine. But to spend $200 million or more on all option schools when you could just as easily build a middle school or do something else with that money, again, I truly question, if we are doing this in the best interest of everybody versus just some. And frankly, I don't think anyone has any malice in that. I think it was just done. This is the easiest thing to do, the quickest thing we can do to try to start to address seats, as opposed to really looking at this holistically and what we should really do. So just wanted to make that comment.
Thanks, and I want to piggyback on that and ask, we've had a year of kind of this holding pattern now. Everyone's been busy with COVID-related issues, but has there been any step back to say, what about some other alternatives? I've been pushing, a look at virtual learning, and it sounds like there is some consideration to that. But was there any guidance from the board or superintendent staff thinking of, hey, maybe we could add seats to HB Woodlawn, for example, and that would help with the middle school, high school issue. Maybe anything like that. There's nothing obvious to me, but I'd like to see if anything's been done on that.
So I can answer a little bit for what I know has been done. We did look at, the Ed Center was developed to be flexible so that it could be repurposed. And we did look at and say, would this be an option where that could become middle school? However, we have to do a CIP project there to provide those common spaces that are going to be used in the bigger building and not, so it's not a standalone building. So you'd have to do another CIP project. Back before the school board direction was done, we put more things back on the table, and I raised Kenmore again. And that was, I think they feel like so much has been invested in the Career Center. They think, we've made some decisions along the way that really have been informed by a number of things that, they don't want to stop because they know that if we start someplace else, it's going to be a long process. I would actually go back earlier too, to some of the early comments I heard at the beginning of the meeting. When this site was selected, we worked with the county manager staff along with a whole group of the county manager's office plus APS managers from, that had to deal with this stuff. We did, at that time, this site was picked because of its access and location. We did have Kenmore in the site, and transportation is a major issue at Kenmore because of Carlin Springs Road and some of the things that we have to deal with Fairfax County and the state in that site. We picked the site, the pool, the county manager, the head of Parks and Rec said that, yes, we can use that aquatic center for our student needs at that building. So I think if we go back and ask that when this, when we get closer to opening this facility, they will, they wanted to make sure that we had access to all of those things. So that's what I have.
Okay, thank you. Steve?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I guess first I'd like to, kind of echo many of the comments that you, John, Rosa, Stacy, Chip, and Lisa said. I'm a little bit, I would have appreciated much greater opportunity to provide input, especially given the major investments that we're considering. I also think that the community has changed, kind of significantly since the 1,300 seat decision was made several years ago. And I also think that it's at least notable that, at least as I recall, the decision not to put seats at the Ed Center was driven in part by the desire not to put more than 700 additional seats at the Career Center site. And now we're talking about doing more seats than that. So I guess kind of echoing what Lisa was saying there, though, I would strongly encourage, a relook of opportunities across the county to include the Kenmore site, to include the Virginia Hospital Center site, so that we can come up with a holistic plan. Looking at the numbers of the seat deficit for the last few years, or the projected one, it looks like we're going to have the worst seat deficit will be a negative 671 seats for the middle school seats. I'd be kind of curious how that compares to the last time that we had a major seat deficit right before Ham and the Heights opened up. As I didn't have kids in the system at that level at the time, but as I recall, Swanson in particular was pretty bad, and I think it was about the same amount of seat deficit. So
I think that's right.
Be really curious how we're going to be proactive, both in terms of boundary changes, in terms of facilities optimization at those sites, and if there's any other way we can bring more seats online quickly. In terms of the parking at the Heights, especially given the uncertainty of funding and where the system is going, and that we're only doing a 3-year CIP, I would strongly encourage that we kick that down the road as far as possible. The cost for a parking spot, and I acknowledge that there's other things involved, but if you take out the cost of the field, and you divide by the number of parking spots, it's about $125,000 a parking spot, which is just an amazing amount of money right now, when structured parking normally costs like $20,000 to $40,000, and we did fleet for about $52,000 a parking spot. I find that those dollar figures very hard to justify, especially also since there's so much parking available in that area in other structured parking garages. And then in terms of the kitchens, I'd really like to see what we could do to accelerate those. Just trying to do napkin comparison. It looked like many of those schools are also some of our schools that have the highest free and reduced lunch rates. And so, truth in advertising, my son or my children go to one of those schools that has about a 20% free and reduced lunch rate. And they stopped buying lunch because they weren't able to get through the lunch line in time. I'm very cognizant of the fact that there are kids that are reliant on school provided lunches. And I think we should look to do all those schools as quickly as possible, but especially looking at those with higher free and reduced lunch rates. And I guess those are my points in summary.
Thank you. Cynthia.
Sorry to jump back in, but I just want to respond to Lisa, your comments about DPR saying that Longbridge Pool might be available to APS use. I think you know that DPR still wants to program in APS pools, which kind of reverses the thing. If they have space for APS over at their pool, why are they wanting to program in APS pools? And the other thing about buses, we've been told by your staff that there is not the best capacity to move students around. And again, there's been a lot of discussion about the advantages, and I hope we will explore this about classrooms that could be virtual and things like that. Swimming instruction is not something you can do virtual. And unless you have more information, we've been told that moving students, I mean, the lack of buses, the timing for buses is a major barrier to anyway, to getting kids where they need to go. Anyway, just wanted to address since you put that up.
Honestly, Cynthia, with the way we're looking at continued option programs and what's going to be needed to get kids to and from Career Center, Montessori, Arlington Tech, all the other option programs we have, somehow we're going to have buses, more buses than we have now. I don't know how we're going to purchase them, where we're going to put them, or where we're going to find the drivers. But there will be sufficient buses midday to move kids back and forth, because we're going to need them to get them to and from school. Last year, I asked a look at kind of a bottom line basis of what if we had a clean slate? What if we didn't have any options programs? If we just did neighborhood schools, what would boundaries look like? What would transportation look like? How many routes could we save? I'd much rather spend money on teachers than on buses. And with COVID, I don't think staff had a chance to really look at that. But I may be giving my bias away, but I think we are not being fully I'd like to be more transparent in the costs, the full costs of options programs, because I believe the transportation and the warped boundaries that result in these things result in significantly higher transportation costs than we would otherwise need. What that amount is, I don't know, and I know it may be a little bit difficult to calculate, but we should be able to get some order of magnitude of what these things are really costing us. And then we can make an informed decision as to the value of the options programs versus more of a neighborhood focus. I plan to ask for that again this year. I don't think we did that last year, but that's an example to me of really having to take a step back and look at this. We are talking about, to me, a $200 million project at the Career Center, which is a big sticker shock based on the needs we have and the resources available to us. So we've talked about being creative, and I think we need to do a little bit more of that. That's me personally. I'm trying to get a feel for where the entire FAC is, because when I make my final year report to the board, I'd like to come with a FAC voice. It sounds like it's going to be difficult to do. We have a wide range of views. But anyway, I want to hear from more of you.
Well, John, since you followed up, it was a comment kind of to what I said. I want you to know that you are speaking to the choir to me. That is a densely populated, walkable area, and that we wouldn't do our best to put things that serve that neighborhood. I'm fully on. I just want you to know that I'm fully on board with you on that.
Thank you. Chip, and then Rosa, and then David.
And I apologize. You're going to hear some background noise. 2 dogs can't keep quiet. Sorry about that. But, you know, I just want to address one, you know, on the transportation side. Actually, John, I think you stole my thunder a little bit there. You know, I would also like to see kind of a cost breakdown. You know, I'm thinking of like the next steps with Drew, right, as an example, right? So when we did the boundary changes for Drew, we extended north to include all the neighborhoods north, and they all had to be bused there, right? And so, and you know, if the same thing happens to kind of fill in that school, you're going to have to move, say, into, you know, the only other population area that's close, which is Fairlington, right? Which is going to, of course, have to bring kids on buses that way as well. And so I guess my point in all of this is all of these discussions need to be further fleshed out with transportation costs in mind. You know, one thing that I think Cynthia just mentioned it, you know, the Career Center site is probably one of the most walkable sites in Arlington, right? Well, why in the world wouldn't we want to consider then, I don't know, a neighborhood school campus there, right? To kind of just, because not only, you know, would you have plenty of neighborhoods and even growth feeding into it, but your transportation costs could potentially be minimal. I mean, it would be incredible to have, say, a middle school there in the middle of where the Career Center is, and that goes up to Columbia Pike and then serves south, right, down into the Drew neighborhoods, right, and others to relieve Gunston, as an example, because we know Gunston is overcrowded, right? Why? What I don't understand is why we're having so many discussions on how option schools can potentially relieve crowding, and I don't know, I'm sorry, but from the history, it doesn't seem to, right? It seems to relieve it maybe for just a really short amount of time. Well, why wouldn't we then now, since it hasn't maybe worked so well, think about this other route of saying, okay, maybe we should do this instead? And again, I don't see that as the discussions that are happening. It's just, we all move to a site, oh, there's land, we're going to put this there. Boom, that's it, right? And decision made, end of story. And it just seems like we're not truly thinking about everything and from a big picture standpoint. So.
Rosa, David, and Heather.
Yeah, I guess my thinking is it still goes, like, I've heard everybody speak, and you know, each person is like, well, my gut feeling is this, it's cost too much for the number of seats, or my gut feeling is this, we don't know the full cost, or, but to me, it still comes back to, we have to be able to have some way of measuring these attributes of our facilities, of our buildings, our new constructions, our projects, you know, whatever we are spending money on, to see that it is the best use of that money, and holistically, I guess, you know, because you can't just look at cost and one other item together. You have to look at it holistically. You know, transportation, how, you know, accessible is it? You know, cost of buses, everything has to be kind of looked at. And I don't see that the projects get that level of thought across all points, I guess. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. David?
Hey, all. at this point, I'm kind of reiterating what a bunch of other people have already said, and John, you said it probably best to start with, is I'm also deeply concerned about the true cost that includes transportation. It really is amazing how much transportation costs to run buses all over the county, and add to that the county's inability to find qualified drivers and the implications that that has during bad weather events. And it just, like, the implications of making a commitment to saying we're going to have multiple programs scattered all over the county and we guarantee everybody gets a free ride to get to them. Maybe, we can't have it all. And I have said I tend to have a bias towards neighborhood schools. I know neighborhood schooling doesn't really help much in the equity end of things, but it really helps in the transportation end of things, and it really helps in the community building end of things. And there's a lot of value in neighborhood schooling. I understand that, way before I ever moved here to the county, there were issues with the county's education programs. There also weren't population pressures. And so the schools had the flexibility to say, hey, let's come up with some creative programs that will attract families to want to live here in Arlington, and we could try new things and it'll get people to stay. And it was effective and it worked. But, people come to Arlington now because we have a terrific school system, the entire school system, not because there's an ATS or because there's an HB Woodlawn, but for the most part, it's hard to pick a bad neighborhood in Arlington where you go like, oh God, but the schools are so lousy. Like, there's always room for improvement, right? But the need for the focused programs, at least a lot of them, or I wouldn't even say a lot, I'll say some of them may have outlived their need. And now the reason we're doing them is, we have inertia, we have nostalgia, we have all sorts of reasons that they're all legitimate reasons when you have a lot of resources. But at a time like this, when we're tightening our belts and trying to come up with creative solutions, it's frustrating to see that not everything is on the table. And, if the board is not going to have the backbone to say, it's time to put all these things on the table and have a real discussion about what value they add, then, I think it's perfectly legitimate for one of the advisory committees like us to say, we've been given this task to try to figure out what makes the most sense and from our perspective. And so we could go out on a limb and have a position on this, because it doesn't seem like the board has the stomach for it right now without somebody backing them up. So it seems like we're in a position to initiate that conversation.
Thank you. Heather, then Stacy.
Yeah, I just since we had the self-professed neighborhood bias, I will be completely honest. My kids are at Key and Gunston in the immersion program. I wouldn't say I'm pro-option or pro-neighborhood. I think I personally like that we have some of these choices. I will also say that at least with the immersion option programs, we are very overcrowded. We're not small classroom sizes, but I also am in favor of the hub stops that are coming out to try to pack the buses more, shorter rides. I'm willing to drive to a hub stop. That's all great. My question with the Career Center is, am I correct? I apologize, my kids are not near high school yet, but am I correct in that the Career Center focuses on programs that are more tech-based, more career-based, vet tech, mechanical engineering type of things, the kinds of things that we're seeing educationally, a trend toward wanting more of. Votech is, you know, what I remember calling it in high school, but some of these programs that would not be available if we did all neighborhood high schools. So there is an increased desire for that kind of technical curriculum. So I'm wondering, not saying one way or the other, but it just seems if we didn't do this, I'm not sure where we could provide that programming. Am I correct that that's what the Career Center and the Tech Ed Center provide?
The biggest program that's at the Career Center is Arlington Tech, and that is problem-based learning. The other programs are much more based on specific needs with either language or special needs.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to throw that out there. Yeah, still new to the high school topics here, so.
Well, that's where doing this all remotely is a little bit as a negative, because in past years we would go around. I've been in the Career Center as part of FAC a couple of times, and it's real interesting. It's impressive to see all the different things they do in that building. And, you know, visiting other schools, seeing some of the incredible schools and seeing some of the ones that are not where they should be. Unfortunately, I mean, Jeff and staff have done a good job of walking us through some of the construction, but it really has been nice in the past few years to actually have these meetings at schools. We do a half-hour tour ahead of time. The principal talks to us. So I'm really sorry we couldn't do that this year. I'm hoping in the fall, FAC can start doing that again. It does help, but it is useful.
We're here to give you a tour anytime you want one.
Hopefully we'll be open and safe and can do that as a group. So
absolutely.
Someone else, Stacy, I think, had your hand up.
I had my hand up, but I think I just wanted to add to that, you know, to the cost of this project, you know, multi-phased, you know, we have to think about the cost of the new building. We have to think about the cost of that would be added to relocate the Arlington Community High students. And we have to think about the cost of converting the current Career Center building to the Montessori and then building the field. So it's total project cost that we have to think of. And I think that it's important that we're looking big picture to think about that. I also think in terms of option choice schools, I think, you know, a couple of years ago, the FAC went to Montgomery County, Maryland, where they have a consortium of their high schools where you can choose, you know, I mean, it's a very complicated, you know, lots of different options of, you know, some focuses at different high schools. And I mean, I think it was a valuable lesson. I don't know that it would work exactly in Arlington, but I think thinking about it, you know, how can we make operational changes that like might move more students into a building that isn't fully occupied? You know, I think we could add, you know, I have a student at HB, but, you know, since that new building was built, I think we could add, you know, I don't know how many more students in there, but I think we could easily add 100 more students into that building without it really impacting instruction at all. You know, maybe more, but I think that should be looked at, you know, to Chip's point. But I think in terms of thinking about options and, you know, it doesn't have to be this black and white, you know, it's either a neighborhood or an option. I think that, you know, we have to think outside of the box in how we, you know, how we operate our facilities, as well as how we, you know, look for new areas. You know, people always, let's renovate new office space. You know, yes, we need to look at that. Let's think about this. But I think how we use the facilities operationally, we also need to think about outside of the box.
Thank you. We got a lot. Anyone else would like to bring anything
John,
up?
I do want to say is that one of the things that Stacy just reminded me of is with regard to the study that we're currently doing with Stantec. We are looking at all of the costs with regard to this because it's all part of that. So we are looking at the move of Montessori. We're looking at the field. We're looking at the temporary moves, and we're looking at the new building. So we are trying to. It's not going to be perfect, but we are trying to make sure that we've incorporated and at least have everything on our list. So
thank you.
It is comprehensive.
Thank you.
John, this is Lisa.
Yep.
Can I add something?
Please.
So when we look at other school districts, APS is one of the very few school districts in Virginia that have pools and requires, swimming is not required by the SOLs. So the pools really become a conversation at the secondary level that drive, how much time did we spend on the BLPC and the Career Center Working Group talking about a pool? It is an ideal spot for a neighborhood school. Absolutely. We looked at how many kids could walk there. That'd be great. However, if we demand that there's a pool there, the cost of that pool means something else has to give. And an option school becomes much more easy because you don't have to go there. So when this original project was put out back on the 1,300 seats, it never included a pool. And the neighbors who came to that conversation at the board to support it, I don't think they understood that it was not ever visioned with a pool there. So, we've got a lot of great things here in Arlington, but they're not required. SOLs do not require you to take a swimming class. It's a great thing to have in Arlington, but it does drive a lot of our conversation.
Well, this is Cynthia Hilton, just jump in that your education, your instructional program under PE has a pool segment for 9th and 10th graders and for 3rd and 4th graders. So unless you change that, that is what is supposed to be offered. And at the high school level, this is provided, as we know, there are 3 pools at the 3 neighborhood pools. There is precedent. HB Woodlawn used to offer a section that if kids wanted to go swimming, they could be best to swimming. The best situation, that's not an option now. So, so I'm just saying, Lisa, if you talk about cost, but 2 things for people to consider. If you're going to have fields, you're going to have lockers and showers. So you're all going to have lockers and showers. That's a good thing. Also, the county should be approached on sharing some costs on this because, as I noted earlier, you can only teach kids during the school day. There's a lot of hours outside the school day that the community could use a facility like this, and the county should have an interest in that.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Actually, I'm sorry. I do. This is Adam.
Go ahead.
So I'm not necessarily trying to say I'm pro option, but I'm having trouble seeing this as a neighborhood school. What one is, neighborhood really only applies to elementary school. I mean, I don't know how you can see a middle school or a high school being quote unquote neighborhood in that sense. But even if you did, TJ Middle School is like 7 blocks away from there. So if you made it a neighborhood school in some way for middle school, you're taking the students maybe who are north of there who are going to TJ. So you can't really go into that area. And if you go south, you're going to end up, going far enough away that you're not going to solve your transportation issue because there's students that are far enough away that they're not going to be walking to the school. So and one of the reasons why they made Patrick Henry into Montessori was because there were too many students in that area to support. There were not enough students in the area to support 2 different elementary schools. So I think we should be careful about expecting this to potentially be a neighborhood school in some way.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll just chime in, John. This is Chip. I mean, I think that comment's more around, again, best use, right? Best use of everything. Not just proximity to TJ or what have you. It's well, again, if you've got smaller classrooms, say at TJ, right, smaller 600, 650 square feet, 500, whatever they are, well, should you have 25 to 30 kids in each of those classrooms, or should you have maybe 10 to 15, like you might have in a lot of the career center, classes and so forth. So, but that's just an example. It's my issue is how is all of this being looked at, right? So, again, we just kind of plop down at these sites and say land is available. Let's just build this here. Well, in the bigger picture, we need all this analysis done to look at transportation, to look at best use of facilities and so forth, to make the best decisions. I mean, I think that's what it all boils down to. And then the other piece of it too is equity, frankly, right? We spend so much time on the AFSAP. Does that get into some of this stuff, right? Some of the things that I was thinking about after, with all the HVAC work that got done, was like, well, why isn't that in, say, the AFSAP? Is that just simply because, I don't know, these other supporting mechanical systems and in addition to that, the size of the spaces, this, that, and the other, for some reason can't be included, or we just have chosen not to include it. So again, I think we still don't have that good blueprint of all of our sites to say how equal are we, and then frankly come up with a priority list, right? What should be done first, really, versus what, I don't know, say certain groups might want, or more parents, because they vote and provide comments, want, I mean, and that's, again, that's to me, that's the issue here. And I think Rosa probably did the best job in kind of summarizing all of that is, how do we make decisions? So,
what's driven my thinking, especially this last few months, has been, I come back to that, for those who've been here for maybe a decade or so, you remember the trolley car, the Columbia Pike trolley car that died, and the $1 million bus stops, and kind of the outrage that caused. So I try not to, we have incredible support throughout the county for education here. That's probably what I love most about this county. You don't see this everywhere, but there's a commitment to education at all levels here. But I don't take that for granted. And I do get concerned that in this environment where revenue is constrained and somewhat uncertain now, to come out with I'm sorry, it's going to be a $200 million project. And the questions I think will be asked, well, did you really look at using all your facilities correctly? I don't think we can say yes. And that's going to come from the county because they have their own needs and priorities, their own stormwater and other needs that they need to meet. So that's the overarching thing that's been driving my thinking and how I wanted to have this discussion. And thank you everyone for weighing in. And it leaves me with a couple of main points and that I plan to bring to the board. And I'll say this is really a full FAC saying this, or myself as chair, maybe a majority, but there is a minority view. My view is my responsibility is to provide to the greatest degree possible the views of FAC. Hopefully it's in some cases unanimous, but if not, I will note whether it's majority or simply my own personal view. But the main points I'd like to make, and then people can individually let me know if they feel differently, because I don't want to necessarily put them on the spot. So let me just outline it, because this is the direction I plan to go and hope to go. Basically, one is kind of the point. Well, I'll start. I think the CIP process needs to be changed. The advisory council process needs to be changed. There were months where I would have loved to have been spending where we just spent this last hour talking about CIP and Career Center. And to do it in this 6-week period is just not the way to do this. And there are ways to do this better, and I think we can get there. So that's one thing. Second, my kids go to neighborhood schools, which I love, but I want to be clear. I'm not saying no option schools or all neighborhood schools. What I'm saying, I hope we can agree that there is not enough transparency over what the costs really are. And I'm fine if we have that transparency and then the county says, you know what, the transportation does cost $1 million more for various option schools. And we think it's worth it because they bring a certain value, a measured value. You're talking about points that Rose was making. So I'm really talking about, to me, we need better transparency on what options in neighborhood schools cost us. Some of it is a little bit harder to get your hands around, but we haven't tried and we need to try to do that. So that's the second point. And the third point is kind of what I started with here. I'm at this point not comfortable with the FAC saying full speed ahead on the Career Center. I think there's all sorts of things that need to be thought of, including the other priorities, whether it's HVAC, whether it's substandard schools in South Arlington. We were planning last year, I think, to renovate and add on to some of these smaller, older schools that it is an equity issue when you look north to south. We unfortunately, I don't think we'll be able to do that, but to move on a career center, but to not get to these schools, I think is an equity issue for us. So I'm not saying I'm gonna get into that level of detail, but bottom line, that leaves me uncomfortable to get fully behind a career center project. I do think this plan that the staff has come up with is a great creative idea. In a vacuum, I think it's really good. But given everything else we've got, I don't want to rush into supporting this. So anyway, those are the main points I plan to bring to the board. I'll stand the line now. We're already half hour past. I'll stick around for a bit longer. And then if people just want to get back to me individually, please, sooner rather than later, I need to start pulling something together. Either supporting me or completely opposed, completely opposite, please. I will do my best to present all viewpoints. And I'll point out, here's my views, here's the majority views, here's minority views. So please, Cynthia has her hand up. And like I said, I'll be around, but we're way past time. If people need to leave, I completely understand. Cynthia?
Yeah, John, could you just explain your last point? Is the reason that you're not comfortable when you say that, again,
Yeah.
there's the Career Center right now, is it you're not comfortable because it's an options place, or could you just better explain you're not comfortable because?
I'm not comfortable because I think the price tag of this is honestly going to be about $200 million, which to me is and it's less than it was a year ago. But I still think the sticker shock of that with all the other needs we have and possibly constrained revenues, constrained debt financing, it's going to come from somewhere else. I don't want to. So anyway, that's why I'm uncomfortable. The cost and the fact that we haven't thought, I think, enough of other alternatives. I agree with staff. We're not ready to put our eggs in the basket of virtual learning to reduce seat needs. But I do think in a year or two, we will have an idea that it will take some pressure off. I'd rather spend money on some other things rather than $200 million on adding seats necessarily. So I hope that better explained.
Yeah, okay. Whether or not they're optional or neighborhood.
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard both arguments. I know in the past Arlington has talked of kind of joint, having sites that would be part option, part neighborhood, and we went away from that years ago. I think for good reason, but I can't explain it very well. Ideally, could it be part option, part neighborhood? I don't think they're thinking of that, and maybe they shouldn't, but So I don't know.
WNL WNL has IB within it. So does Wakefield. So we have that at our secondary level, not at the elementary.
Has what? You mean joint option and?
Yeah, WNL, Washington Liberty has IB in it. Wakefield has immersion. Gunston has immersion. So our secondary schools have that. Some of our secondary schools have that model, whereas our elementary do not. It was too hard when Montessori was part of a neighborhood.
Okay, so could the Career Center be Arlington Tech plus neighborhood school?
Possibly.
But I do remember bringing this up, and then there was reasoning that we didn't want to go in that direction. Do you remember what the reasons were? I don't, sorry.
I don't right now.
Okay. Okay.
I'm sorry, John, you're still here. So can I go back to your 200 million? Maybe that's a number
I admit that's my number. Staff is getting estimate of that, but this is something I'm pretty confident that's going to be the number, just around there.
What I wanted to ask about that, does that 200 million, is that just the building itself, or
No.
is that the okay.
That's no, not transportation. That's really what Stacy was talking about. You demolishing buildings, doing some staging, building some parking, doing fields, building that new school, changing career center in some ways.
Okay, that's the 200 million.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, nothing to do with it has nothing to do with the less transparent costs that I'm talking about, the transportation and things like that. Anyone else? Well, okay, I'll stick around for 5 minutes. Thank you, everyone, for a real interesting and great meeting. And please feel free to contact me, please, in the next day or two on, whether you feel agree, disagree, somewhere in the middle. Let me know, and I will try to convey that all those thoughts in a concise manner to the board. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Hey, John.
Hi.
So something that I've always wondered about, I should probably just look into this, but the District of Columbia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their policy, they have vastly different policies on transportation, don't they? Like, you get into a school, there are no school buses. Does the District of Columbia operate a school bus program?
There definitely are school buses. I don't know how they compare versus Arlington. I know that some of their school buses, a lot of them are smaller than ours because of the city streets they need to go through. But
Yeah.
I don't know how,
But I think a lot of district kids, who are not going to neighborhood schools, I think they take public transportation.
I at least look, I can tell you, coming
Is a
from
lot
New
more
York,
routes?
all of my relatives that were, living in Queens, years ago, that's how they all got to school, by public transportation. Now, I don't know if our system is arranged well enough that it would, like New York City, where it's easy to get from one way or another, or if you have to live along one line. But yeah, I think there is some more of that in DC, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, if the art bus system were to be modified, say, to provide, morning and afternoon services that go in certain directions.
Yeah.
Maybe APS could help fund those changes.
Yeah.
Take some of the money out of our own school bus system and put it into the art bus system. Maybe there's something in there that'll get, 80% or 75% of the kids' transportation needs met, and then the other 25 is some, combination of other stuff. But we gotta think of, all these assets that we have at our fingertips that we're just like, sorry, that's not our jurisdiction. That's the county's jurisdiction.
Well, that's what worries me, that if someone asks, asking for whatever money we're asking for, have you really thought through, what you need and what you can do? I can honestly say we have. I'll give you an example. We went through this with program moves. If you look at the 3-year projections, 3 elementary schools in the western edges of this county are going to be way under capacity.
Yep.
Now, I don't think boundary moves are going to fix that. Just given where these schools are, I don't know how you can fix it. So what are we going to do with those schools? How are we going to fill them up? I don't have an answer, but I think someone's going to look at it and say, you want to build at the Career Center, but you've got all these schools. Yes, they're different schools, they're a different part of the county, but they're half empty.
Right.
What are you going to do? So that's just one. It's a concrete example. Maybe it's not the best example, but to me, it's a concrete example of, have you looked at things? And I hate to push virtual learning. Because it's not for facilities lead on this. We need to hear more from the teachers and teaching and learning. Yeah. But I do think there are going to be a good number of the population at the high school level, not elementary, not middle school, but the high school level, who either want that part-time and a small group that will want it full-time. And you can worry less about seats, or put seats in other areas that are, office building type things. Yeah. And then you can spend the money on the other stuff, the fields, the stages, the stuff that, the kids really don't have enough of.
Think about it right now. Like I was just thinking, there's there's some kids in our neighborhood who are eligible to go to Yorktown, but they chose to go to W&L because they have the IB program and some other stuff. Well, what if you could access the IB program remotely, and then you could take some classes at Yorktown, you could take some at W&L, and you don't have to commit to one program or the other.
I would agree with that. I've thought of that for some of the language services we offer. That the smaller ones like Mandarin, Arabic, that you have one teacher, 1 or 2 teachers. So they want to be at Washington, W&L. Why can't a Yorktown senior virtually, these kids can do better at it than we can. I mean, they know how to do this. And they can do that from home. They can do it from Yorktown, or they can do it from some little office space that's nice and hang out with their buddies to do that.
Yeah.
So I don't have the answers, but these are things I think we need to think through before we commit to a beautiful
major build another building. Yeah. And then we'll sell off some other asset that's in the wrong part of the county, and then 10 years from
I'm wondering if that's what we're going to have to do, because I don't know what else we can do. So, I think we're going to have to think about that. But, the money's going to come from somewhere, and I'd rather it goes to the great teachers that my kids have had. The good administrators they've had, some of the technology stuff they've had. That's what I'd rather money than to transportation and building a new building somewhere.
Yeah, and while we're, we started talking about the Career Center, but that parking garage solution at HB, that's just, why are we building dedicated parking in an urban school when there's parking garages there with tons of capacity left over?
So I'm glad you brought that out. I failed to address that. And I think because we did this September of a year ago, I guess.
Yeah.
And I tried to convey from FAC a middle of the road, and I got blasted. So the impression was, we don't want to add a parking garage. And then I didn't hear, which surprised me, I didn't hear the Heights principal or PTA. It was their opportunity to pitch it, and they never did. I didn't hear anyone say, oh, we really need to have this. I heard other people saying it on their behalf.
Yeah.
But I thought that was kind of a non-starter, so I was very surprised to hear that come up. Now, I think Jeff is saying, I need to look back at this, that it's needed, that they're going to have to spend some money anyway because of, what was it, water issues or something?
Oh, I can't remember.
So I was surprised to see it come back onto the CIP at
It's
this
the
time.
stormwater. They have to do some stormwater construction.
Okay, so for a little extra money, they would get the parking anyway. Is that the deal, Adam?
Right.
Okay,
Uh,
that's what changed.
And it's better to do the 75 than the 24 because it's not you're not
yeah,
taking
you get
it
more
down by
program
to
out of it.
1/3 the cost, but you're getting
Yeah.
1/3 the spaces.
Okay, that's what it was. Yes, that's what changed. So
All right.
kind of conveniently a wastewater, stormwater problem. You got it, might as well.
Yeah.
It's a big issue. I mean, any construction project these days is a huge amount that
yeah,
goes to
stormwater is a huge expense.
stormwater and fire retention, all that kind of stuff. And the county has a tendency to over construct their bioretention areas. They're more like wastewater facilities than they are bioretention areas.
Well, think about Impact Superior Center. That's why I throw out 200 million, because we haven't even talked about stuff like that. They're going to start digging and hit a spring and all sorts of stuff. So.
Hey, John, I wanted to chime in on something. At the end of the meeting, you were asking why the Career Center they weren't considering it like partial neighborhood.
Yes. Yes.
I won't go big into my soapbox about the idea of that's a oxymoron, a neighborhood high school, because it's not a neighborhood. I mean, it's a much larger area than that. But anyway, that aside, the bigger issue I think was that there are expectations when you have a quote unquote neighborhood high school about what those campuses should have.
Yes.
And that was the problem, is that you can't have all those things like the pool and all this stuff on that campus. So that's why the option school approach makes a lot more sense for that.
That's right. Space. Thanks for refreshing my memory. Yeah, that brings it back a little bit. Thank you. Okay. I mean, Adam, you know where I come out. This whole thing of, I'd much rather make sure these kids have, some real fields and the seats are easy. It's the other stuff that's hard.
Right. And plus, you have all the specs and stuff like that for the classroom space, but you don't have, I mean, there probably are specs someplace, but we certainly don't have any specs for what the facilities should have. Beyond that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks for your incredible ACTC report earlier.
It's a marathon, I know.
No, it was great to hear from you. Thank you. I appreciate it. And all right, well, thank you. If you got some further thoughts, please send them to me and I'll start pulling something together.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Take care.
Bye.